insecurity shrinks our optimism, beliefs around potential, and blinds us to things that really are or how they could be. We project our greatest fears when we succumb to the negative ways we are conditioned to react. How can we start to overcome insecurity and strengthen ourselves? According to author Leo Babauta, we can begin with a small dose of courage. A bit of courage, just in small doses to start with, but it means a willingness to set aside all the distractions for a little bit and just focus on what you're struggling with. By observing and seeing, we can catch the early moments we allow our insecurities in. Pay attention to when you are being driven by insecurity and notice what exactly makes you contract. The secret is that the path out can be found in the patterns we have repeated thousands of times. Ignite a small dose of your courage and fiercely protect its flame. Commit to breaking one limiting belief at a time. With good work and focus, you'll soon be able to spread your wings and fly higher. Our Louisville chapter chose this month's exploration of Insecure. Rachel Sinclair illustrated the theme, and WordPress.com is presenting the theme globally. So about our speakers. About Jasper James. Jasper has worked for nearly 15 years as a community activist, artist, and facilitator. As the co-founder of Activism Articulated, a crisis PR firm located in Sacramento, they are one of the only advocacy communications firms run by queer, mixed-race women of color and provide media training and crisis consulting for organizations nationwide. During their tenure as president of the Women's March Sacramento chapter, Jasper co-founded Women's March Black, an all-Black branch of Women's March National Leadership. They are an active member of the ACLU Sacramento Chapter Board, Sacramento Stonewall Democratic Club, Sacramento's Black Chapter of Commerce, and belongs to the ACLU Speaker Bureau and the newly formed AB 392 Oversight Committee. About Paul Willis. You might remember Paul from our 2019 Flow event. He is a hip-hop artist, educator, and community organizer who works to create positive community building experiences through art, engagement, and service, engaging youth and using music as a tool to inspire and educate. As part of the ZFG Collective and So Far Sounds Sacramento, he organizes pop-up shows throughout Sacramento, leads conversations around social justice, equity issues, and artistry, and empowers communities and youth. His guiding pillars include hip-hop, education, social justice, and building community. Together, they've been working on a document called the Black Bill of Rights that seeks to rectify our past and provide security to Black people here in Sacramento and across the nation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the screen over to Jasper and Paul.
Cool. Good morning, everyone. Hey, there are so many hands that just waved right now. That was amazing.
Love.
That was awesome. You know, you've all had an opportunity to kind of hear from me, and I wanted to just introduce you all to a good friend of mine. This is Jasper James, and she'll be doing most of the talking. But I have a couple of questions and a PowerPoint slide that I'd like to share during this time that we'll have just like speaking notes and things like that. So I'm going to share my screen so you won't see me very much, but you'll be able to hear me just fine. Okay? And let's jump right in. Jasper, I want to ask you this first question just so that we can kick off our conversation, but why are Black lives insecure in America?
Oh, man, you know, I mean, in order to really answer that properly, we have to take a look back into history and see how all of this started. So the insecurity is first and foremost rooted in the fundamental premise that we are not human. Black people are not human. And that was really the premise that the forefathers, they use that term loosely, were able to come in and basically say, hey, you know what, these are not humans. So we can just basically take over and commandeer them. the irony of this is that when people say that, dehumanized, I don't think they really get the full concept of it. Like, it really is, when we're talking about this, we're talking about, like, cattle, when they're in the cage and there's no room for them to move, and they're, have to sit and stand in their own wastes. Like, that is what we came from. That's what was forced upon us. And so, again, but the irony of that is that, they did all of this under the premise that we could not govern ourselves. But it's interesting because I've based on history, if you really connect the dots, you start to see that that's really not true. And I think that the insecurity of Black people intrinsically stems from white people's insecurity and their white fragility and them losing power. So it's not really about the insecurity of us not being able to do things for ourselves. It's about the fact that they do not want us to do things for ourselves. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. Because it leads right into the next question that I have for you. Just about what are some of the things that they've done to maintain control? If you could help put that in a historical context for us, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So, like I said, if you start to connect the dots with history, you start to see that white people have created loopholes for getting out of giving us the rights that it seems that we have on paper. So, like, the perfect example here, right, is the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment was the, abolishing slavery. And there were a lot of things that happened during this time that, that's not in the history books. But the main thing is that kind of leads me to the second insecurity, and that's lack of housing, lack of ability to be able to create generational wealth for ourselves. And that really puts us at a disadvantage. And that was really one of the main things that white owners of land and the lawmakers, the ruling class, they understood. So when Lincoln abolished slavery, he understood that the way that we were going to be able to turn that conversation, that messaging of us not being human, Black people not being human, is if we owned land. So he went through a lot of things to actually set Black people up in order for us to start to build that wealth and to start to really shift the minds of the ruling class and the people who were there who were using Black people as slaves. So he created something called the Bureau of Freedmen. And the Bureau was very important. So they helped slaves learn how to read. They helped slaves to find their family members. They helped free slaves find housing and find land. And so out of this premise was the 40 acres and a mule, right? Everyone has heard about the 40 acres and a mule. But the thing about the 40 acres and a mule was that was what was determined to be the essential piece to allow people to build their wealth. But here's the caveat, right? So the land that they gave to the freed slaves was actually land that the white owners didn't want. So what a lot of people don't know about the 40 acres and the mule concept was that it was not land given to the freed slaves. It was actually land that was leased to them for 2 years. And so they had 2 years to build financial wherewithal to buy at the third year. But they gave them crummy land. So a lot of the times these freed slaves were not able to till the land to make it profitable. So then they lost the land. But that was, honestly, the whole 40 acres and a mule idea, that concept, really only lasted a year. Actually, less than a year. And technically, the abolition of slavery only lasted for less than a year. Because if we look at history, what happened? In January, right? January 1865 was when slavery was abolished. But then Lincoln was assassinated. So the Bureau of Freedmen had no leader. So what ended up happening was within 4 months worth of time, Andrew Jackson took over for Lincoln. He reversed everything with black codes, and that was connected to the Democrats at the time. I know that there's a lot of, back and forth with all of this, but there were the slave owners that were in the South. And so basically they used these black codes and they used vagrancy laws. Now, vagrancy laws had, they've been in existence since back in the day before everyone came over here to America. But it was essentially to keep the riffraff out, so to speak. So with all of these little adjustments, they essentially took away all of the rights that we got from the 13th Amendment. And a lot of people don't even really understand that today, when we talk about the 13th and the 14th and the 15th Amendment, all of those protections are gone. And they're gone because in every generation of Black people have had to deal with loopholes that have been created by the ruling class.
Yeah. So, I think it's important to recognize, I think one of the most famous examples of Black people kind of taking really terrible land, kind of turning it into something good was Tulsa. I think that's been in a lot of the news. There's like a viral article that's been out. People have seen The Watchmen. So some people may be able to kind of put that into some of that historical context. They may not know some of the other kind of cities or particular cases, but that's a big one that I think folks can look at, because Black people kind of took that land that was terrible because there was oil underneath it, and turned it into a thriving city that then got destroyed due to racism and a lot of jealousy from folks who couldn't own that part of town anymore. You said that every generation of Black people, they've seen their oppressors kind of jump through these loopholes. And you started to describe some of those loopholes and the insecurity that comes with them. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about what some of those loopholes might look like in modern day context. We've seen a lot of stuff happening in the national news recently around police brutality and all of that, but there's a big loophole that I think that we should cover that a lot of folks don't know about in the police Bill of Rights.
Yeah, actually, Paul, if you could just go back to the last slide for a second. Mm-hmm. I just want everyone, I didn't really explain it, but I just want everyone to take a look at the dates here, right? So what we're seeing here is from 1780 to 1910. These are the times in which these particular loopholes were created that essentially took the rights and protections that Black people had away. So this is basically the premise of why we're having this discussion today, is because there is no good faith among the ruling class, among white people who have been involved with the ruling class, because they understood that even if they passed the law, they could do whatever they basically felt like to take those rights away. And we would not really be any the wiser, because they usually do it behind closed doors, right? This is a whole, legislation and policy is like an entire language in and of itself. So I just wanted to have people understand that this is the time frame that we're talking about, and now we're moving that time frame of 1910 to 1964, because that's really how long these things were lasting. And so now, going back to Paul, going into the next phase of our generation of loopholes, which comes from the police union contracts and the police Bill of Rights. Just a show of hands, how many people are familiar with police union contracts, police Bill of Rights, and what they actually do? Was there a hand raised on here? I can't see. Okay. All right. So the insecurity that comes with the police union contracts and the police Bill of Rights is essentially that they have created two separate judicial systems. And you hear people say this often, They're like, oh, there's two systems and, only one governing. Well, yeah, that is true. But, I think that people actually miss to the extent that that is true. Um, you know, Basic facts about policing. Policing stemmed from the ruling class and the white owners wanting to be able to maintain control and to keep freed slaves in line. So essentially, anyone who was white was able to police Black people. And so what we see now today is actually the legacy of that kind of policing of Black bodies. And what a lot of white people don't understand is that part of that legacy from the ruling class, because the ruling class wasn't giving up their money, but they gave them Black people instead. So they gave them the ability to take Black lives. They gave them the ability to shed Black blood and hang us. And, so when we're seeing all of these lynchings again, right? It makes sense. It makes sense because those individuals who have the ancestry of understanding the legacy of policing and the ability of white people to have a completely judicial system outside of what we have today, Black people have today. And so the policing has really put us into this generation into another spin, just like in every other generation from 1700s until now. And with the Police Bill of Rights in particular, one, there's only 15 states in the United States that have the Police Bill of Rights. And the reason why that is because the other states have police union contracts. So for the most part, they use the police union contracts as their Police Bill of Rights. But essentially, the Police Bill of Rights, along with qualified immunity, that's been in the news a lot, is essentially the way that this generation of lawmakers have found loopholes to take away our rights again. So when people say, oh, the police killed that Black man and they took away his constitutional rights of due process. Yes, that is absolutely 100% true, but that is not the entire story. The police union contracts and the Police Bill of Rights, they are all documents that are signed and negotiated by your local politicians. So this means that if a Black person in your community that's innocent and unarmed gets killed, this means that your local leaders understood that there was going to be clauses within these contracts that would essentially allow them to go free. So in this slide here, these are just a couple of examples. If an officer is cleared of wrongdoing or the charges were dropped, the department can't publicly acknowledge that the officer was under investigation. The officer typically, if they do kill an unarmed civilian, they have the ability to say whether or not they want the claim in their file. So essentially, all of these things together, and of course, qualified immunity, which breaks down to essentially that you can't sue the police, which is completely unheard. I mean, it's unfathomable because if a doctor does something and kills a patient, you can sue a doctor. A doctor takes an oath, and a policeman takes an oath. But we have these concerted loopholes, and when they're put together in tandem with one another, they create this system that is completely unfair. And everyone from the political aspect of it knows it. So this is really what we have to understand. I'm so glad that it's finally becoming more amplified in the news about the qualified immunity. They just overturned it and said that they weren't going to take it away. And these things have to change because right from the start, as soon as those contracts are signed, our local leaders are basically, they're putting us off to pasture, basically. They're just like, okay, well, if someone gets killed, let's take our chances, But that's also connected to the campaign financing, right? Because, police unions have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. And so this is where we are today. And I think that a lot of people have wanted to talk about a lot of different things, concerning what Black people need and want right now. But honestly, for me, every single Black person, every single white person who, or, you know, anyone who considers himself to be an ally needs to understand that this is really the foundation of what's happening now. This is the reason why killer cops go free. This is the reason why Breonna Taylor's killers, who walked into her, ran up on her home and shot her in her bed while she was asleep, while they still walk free. These things are happening because of these documents, and it has to end.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I see one of the other points here, just an officer under investigation cannot be questioned or investigated by non-government agents. So essentially eliminating the impact and effect of civilian review boards. You know, there's a lot, the cooling off period. Mm-hmm. There's a lot that goes into a lot of this stuff. And I know that folks are talking about, how do we get rid of this? You know, what do we do now? And your work over the past few years has been creating this tool called the Black Bill of Rights to combat the police union contracts and the police officer Bill of Rights. So I'd love for you to take some time to really kind of introduce this idea and let folks know just the frame behind it, and some more. So.
Yeah. So as you all know, part of what we do for my business, Activism Articulated, is that we deal with crisis communications. And so I was actually telling Missy before the call started, I was like, she's like, how are you? And I said, well, I got to tell you, I said, when Black people get killed by the police, we get busy, right? Like our phone doesn't stop ringing. And that's because we, as an organization, have a very different approach to our crisis strategy and to our PR in general. And that's because of the fact that we have, my partner and I have so many intersectional oppressions that we're able to really see things from this perspective that a lot of PR professionals and communication professionals often don't see. And with that, we were there for Stephon Clark, and we were on the front lines. We were at the marches. We were in the rooms with leaders, and just really talking about what are we supposed to do as Black people. And then from there, it started to really dawn on me that we, this problem that Black people have, this epidemic of racism, there has to be something that we're missing. And so that's what started this whole process for me. And it, started off this whole thing about, for the last 2 years, I ended up speaking to like over 100 different families who have lost loved ones at the hands of the police. I took those times very much to heart, because every single person, they had a different story, but it was all the same. And that was that they were tired of being scared. Like they were, as Black people, it was, that the fatigue, there's Black fatigue, and the Black fatigue is happening against this backdrop of white amnesia. So not only are we having to live with the fatigue of being Black and what that means in our culture, in our society, but then we also have to fight for us to even be able to be listened to. And the only way people listen to us is if a white person says that they should, right? So then I was like, this just can't happen anymore. So I started this process to build the Black Bill of Rights. And there are different types of bills of rights for everything. There's victim bills of rights. It's essentially like protection within protection of the law. And so I looked at what I felt as though should be my lane, because there's a lot of people doing a lot of things right now, and I'm not trying to step on anyone's toes or trying to get into what everyone is trying to do. I picked this because it seemed like this was the one thing that people weren't really talking about, and what the repercussions of these particular things are to our communities. So the first thing that I wanted to do was I wanted to create something that these families who have lost loved ones could have in their hands, that they could actually take, They don't have to start from scratch. They don't have to reinvent the wheel. I gave them these articles to essentially say, okay, look, this is what you have to be asking for from your local leaders. If a person in your family gets killed by police, these are the things that you should be asking for within the first, like the 24 to 72 hour window. This is what you need to be asking for. This is what's going to give the foundation for there to be safety within your community. So that was the articles. The second thing that I looked at was the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, which is POBAR, Police Bill of Rights. And I went through all of the different documents because most of them are different. They basically say the same thing, but there's some variations. And so I kept looking at them and combed through the pages. And then finally I was just like, oh, okay, you know what? I'm just going to take this document, take all the leniencies out, and then put in the protections for Black people. So that was the revision to the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights. And then the articles were essentially the foundation for a series of the legislation memos. And those memos were taken from the 2019 report for the suggestions of what California should do to keep people safe. So I spent the last 2 years talking to lawyers. I didn't do this alone. It was just really a vision that I had, and my intentions were to really create a space of safety because Black people have never been able to be sovereign within our own personhood. And I think that that's really the part of this conversation that has been missing in the conversations that I've heard. And we can't overstep that because we didn't ask to be here. We were taken from where we were from. And then from there, we were put into a system that we didn't even ask to be in. And then that system is completely unjust. So what do you do? What do we do as Black people to disrupt this system and to actually say, hey, you know what? We're not asking right now. What this is Black people saying, we never received what we were supposed to get. So now we're saying that this is how we get this little piece of safety and peace within our own personhood. And the Black Bill of Rights articles and the concept itself is here to do that, to help communities to do that.
Yeah, just looking at some of the articles right now on this slide and just want to name some of them for folks here. Use of force policies that include stakeholder outreach, accessible community outreach, key judicial and policing rights given back to the community input for law enforcement expenditures, school environments free of criminalization. A lot of the defund the police movement kind of covers some of this, but I think that one of the things that's missing is people hear that phrase of defund the police and they feel like that's an impossible task. And I feel like this kind of gives some more specific language to combat some of the legal protections that currently exist. So that's why I appreciate this particular framework. And I hope that folks get some more time to spend with this particular document to really learn about how impactful it's going to be. My next question for you is, where can people find this and find more information about the Black Bill of Rights, and how do they get in touch with you? What are the next steps in this process?
Sure, yeah. So as the slide says, you can go to activismarticulated.com. When you go there, you'll see there's a tab that says Black Bill of Rights. Just click on that. And there's basically a brief description, overview of what the Black Bill of Rights are, and you can sign the petition. And honestly, the petition right now is one of the biggest things you can help this process, because the petition is asking Kamala Harris to endorse the Black Bill of Rights. And this is important because Kamala is on the board of the Black Caucus, and she's also on the short list for VP. So, Black people understand Kamala has her issues, right? But I think that in terms of strategy, this is something that she should definitely be endorsing. And I think that if we can push this through our networks and really get her to understand the importance of, not just passing, this is not just about legislation. This is actually about Black people understanding that we've had enough. We've had 400 years. The framers, the lawmakers, they've had 400 years to get this right. And here's the issue with all of this is that the system was not made for us. The laws, they were not made for us. Even the amendments, the amendments were here to add protections, but that doesn't change the container. The container was not meant for us. So when we talk about, the stuff that the framers put into the Constitution for people to hold the ruling class accountable, you have to remember that this conversation was really only supposed to be between two people, white men ruling class and white working class or white people who owned land. Like, this did not have anything to do with women. This didn't have anything to do with brown people. As far as they were concerned, we were not even supposed to be free ever. So when we're looking at this from the perspective of the founding fathers are pretty much deadbeat dads to me. And we have systems in place here within the United States that basically speak to what happens when a father does not take care of their child. They lose privileges. They have to pay money. And the children have the ability to say whether or not they want that father in their lives. This is precedent. We already have precedent. So this is us taking that next step to basically have this conversation and say, look, we understand that there is a system that we have to work in. There is a container of democracy. But that container of democracy, we've been watching it evaporate over the past few weeks. When our government starts to pull out the National Guard on us, there's officers in the street that we don't know who they are, where they're from. There's no names, there's no tags, rubber bullets, tear gas. Our country is coming against us, fighting for the rights that we should have, right to assembly, all of these things, which is interesting, right? Because so the Black Codes, just to back up, the Black Codes were created after the Bill of Rights, right? The original Bill of Rights. So the original Bill of Rights tell you that you have the right to organize, you have the right to come together, you have the right to do all the free speech. But the Black Codes actually, it took those things away. So we actually really, in some ways, yes, they have been changed over time. I want to make that clear, but it's really about the death by 1,000 cuts. It's a little thing here and a little thing there and a little thing there. And for me as a Black person, and I hope I can stand here and say for the Black folks that I have spoken to and the people who have helped me with these documents and helped me perceive it and to bring it into fruition, is that the fact that we have not been able to gain our personhood, the fact that we have not been able to build the way that we need to build for ourselves, the fact that every time we did build for ourselves, our own government came and blew it up. Like, the social contract between white people, the lawmakers, and Black people have been broken so many times. And so we have 400 years of evidence to see that I don't really think that they're going to make good on these promises. And I don't think that we should to be naive in thinking that they're going to all of a sudden change their way. So it's up to us as Black people and also the allies who want to stand with us to really come together and be like, you know what? They're right. We need this opportunity to be able to speak for ourselves, govern ourselves, to be able to be involved with the expenditures, to not have our local politicians sell us out because they want to get campaign money. Like, this is the stuff. Basically what we're doing in our communities is we're paying police to kill us. Because when they kill an innocent civilian, they get paid the entire time that they're being interrogated. They get paid while they're on leave. And then sometimes they don't even lose their jobs. But if they lose their jobs, then they're also able to go someplace else and get another job and then we're paying for their pensions. This doesn't make any sense. We have to be the
There's
ones.
not another profession where that would be allowed.
It's obscene. It's obscene. Yeah. So we need to disrupt this thing right now. And I think that the Black Bill of Rights and going through this process of really educating people about qualified immunity, about the Police Bill of Rights, about the police union contracts, and the connection that it has with your local politicians, why that matters.
Yeah. And I'll say that, I think it's really important that folks share and sign a petition because as we've seen over the past few weeks, as a bunch of our leaders have let us down for a variety of reasons. One, there's campaign money that's tied to it, that's for sure. But the other part is our politicians are also protected by the police, because they are elevated in their roles in our society. We understand that there are potential public threats and all of that. But if your police detail is looking at you as a politician and you are advocating for defunding the police or pulling back on some of these protections, they, may look the other way when your life may really need it. So I don't think it's I think it's really on us as a people to say that this is what we want. We can't rely on our leaders to say that, they can commit to these things. But I think it's on us as, citizens here in the United States to really put the pressure on the system and on our politicians and everyone else to enforce these kinds of things. Because otherwise we're going to continue to see the same cycle. Jasper, I just want to thank you because I know this has been a few years of tremendous, not just hard work, but heart work. And I appreciate you for it.
Thank you, Paul.